Thank you so much for being with us, Shannon.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and be a part of the conversation.
Yay. So can you start by telling us a little bit about what got you into counseling? Like, was this something you always had in mind?
Absolutely. So like I said, I went to Temple and I majored in psychology with a minor in public health. And I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with that. I ended up taking a full-time job right after I graduated as a case manager working with young adults. So I totally found a passion in working with young adults. I found that I related to them really easily. And I just really enjoyed working with them. They're so creative and innovative, just really like fun and lively, which I think as adults we sometimes lack a little bit. So they definitely kept me young and spry as well. And I just found so much passion working specifically with underprivileged and minority communities, and wanted to further that, especially as a brown woman myself. I found that there wasn't a lot of representation in the counseling mental health field. Mm-hmm. So I found that was my niche and I fit really well into it. And I love the work that I do.
Does that help with when you do encounter some kids who are feeling marginalized or feeling sort of left behind?
Absolutely. I know we're doing work now. We just started an ethno-drama group, we call it, working specifically with racial trauma in people of color. So people of color who have experienced trauma related to their racial background and identity. So I find that has really been able to pinpoint the part of my passion that I want to work specifically in developing and working in this group that we have. So I'm able to represent what I didn't see in a lot of these spaces, not only for myself, but for other people that look like me too.
Without getting into anybody's actual persona, sure, giving anything away, about somebody's identity, can you talk about some of the things that you've seen happen in that milieu?
Absolutely. Like I can speak from my own experience. Microaggressions are a huge thing I've experienced growing up, not only just in society and my community, but within my family as well, more of like my extended family. So being able to hold space for that on top of anything from police brutality to multi-generational trauma that we experience, not firsthand, but at the experience of our parents or grandparents or even beyond that as well. Because we found that it carries through generations and through our DNA, which is extraordinary to think that something like that is even possible. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that's 2 or 3 of the reasons why I think groups like this need to exist specifically for people of color.
Yeah. Absolutely. Wow, that's wonderful. Mm-hmm. What are you mostly seeing now with the focus on adolescents? Because you do treat
yes, I do
other ages as well.
Absolutely. Yes, right. So a lot of my work here at Caron focuses on teen therapy and counseling. I run the teen intensive outpatient program that we have, meets 3 days a week for about 2 hours each day. And we see the greatest concern or issue I think we see is specifically in cannabis use and how it is so accessible to our teens now.
Is it also, what's their perception on cannabis? Like, what do they think of it when they're coming in and they're like, they may not be the most willing treatment patients. What is their perception on like why they're there and, do they need to be there?
Yeah, great question. I think a lot of them are coming in like, oh, my parents want me to be here. I'm just here because my parents want me here. But I have a really good group of teens right now, and a lot of them are like, I find that I'm reaching for this more often than I want to be reaching for it, and I'm reaching for it to go to sleep easily. Or I had someone just recently express, and I thought it was so great they were able to come to this conclusion on their own. She was able to express like, I don't want to experience these feelings, and I want to kind of like diminish the feelings that I'm experiencing, whether it be symptoms of anxiety or symptoms of depression. She finds that she experiences them at like a hyper arousal stage, so she gets really worked up over this. And using cannabis, almost overusing it, has now diminished her sense of feeling, where she doesn't know what her sense of reality is anymore.
Wow.
So being in this group where she has been abstinent from use, she's like, I feel like I'm living life for the first time again. And she's only 14. So I know that there are so many other teens that experience similar feelings too.
You mentioned anxiety and depression. Do you find that that's what draws them to use cannabis in the first place?
I think a lot of it is, just from my experience working with the teens, I think a lot of it can be that anxious and depressive symptomology. I think another reason that cannabis specifically draws in a lot of teens is also just how it's marketed. All of my friends are using it. It's kind of like the cool thing. I had a teen in one of my first groups when I first started here at Caron who expressed that he used to deal drugs, that like cannabis was his primary substance that he would sell, and he would have people hitting him up all the time like, hey, can we buy from you? Hey, do you have anything on you? And he liked that because it provided him like a sense of purpose. He thought that these people were his friends. And then when he stopped using all substances, started coming to group out of his own will to help provide support and structure around stopping use, he was like, oh, these people aren't hitting me up anymore. No one's texting me. These weren't really my friends. And I think that's a part of it as well. Like if all my friends are using it, I'm going to feel left out if I don't, or I'm just not cool enough, or I don't fit in. We see that a lot with nicotine vape use too, right? So I think that's another primary example of why teens specifically use it.
Do you think they're using them concurrently, the nicotine and cannabis?
I do see a lot of concurrent use. I can't say whether it's like there's a true connection between the two, but I do think that a lot of people use both concurrently, and I see that in adults as well.
Speaking of adults, do you engage with the parents very much?
I do, yes. And I think parent support and parent engagement, it comes at all different levels. Some parents kind of enroll their teens in a program and are like, all right, they're your problem now, fix them. And it's so interesting being able to express to them like, this isn't a problem that has to be fixed. Your teen needs support, and they need love and engagement and constant, like they need that rapport to be built back with their parents, right? And that is often lacking, where the parents are like, this is a problem, it needs to be fixed. It's seen more as like a reprimanding rather than, hey, let's get you support. So being able to like work with the parents in order to really define what treatment is and what it looks like, it has been so wonderful being able to work with the parents, and seeing that shift in their perspective too is so cool.
Wow. It sounds like you're saying that like punitive maybe isn't the best way to go. It's probably not
Definitely.
effective, but it is like seeing this as an opportunity to support, as you said.
Absolutely. Because I think once the parents understand like, hey, they're not doing this to rebel, or maybe they're doing it because they're experiencing these other symptoms that need targeted treatment, individualized treatment, to then work towards their substance use too, it like changes their entire perspective of what's going on with their teen. They're not doing it out of spite towards their parents or to be petty. It's them trying to seek validation or to seek support in a substance, a connection with something where connection might be lacking everywhere else in their life.
Wow. I think it sounds so interesting that you're working with groups too. Like what is that dynamic like, so that when you have peers kind of with each other going through this process? And let me ask you too, sorry to interrupt, is it like a rolling kind of a thing, so that some of your clients have been there for a few weeks and now there's a new person coming in?
Yeah, so we do our teen IOP. I think most of our groups actually at Caron are open groups. Open just means that there's a constant like revolving door essentially of patients discharging, hopefully successfully. That's what we want out of treatment, right? And some of them just starting in. So those like varying levels of treatment length as well, I think serves such a great purpose, because there are teens in there that have been there for a couple weeks or maybe a month or two that can really speak to like, hey, it is really weird and awkward starting off at first, and it gets better over time. I try to keep the groups interesting with like some sort of aspect of psychoeducation as well as that psychotherapy. And all of us at Caron Outpatient are now trained in experiential therapy as well, which is a really amazing modality. I can't speak more highly about it. Being able to incorporate movement and like more like fun activity into treatment, because then it doesn't seem like that stereotypical laying on a couch kind of treatment that a lot of teens are like, I don't want to go to therapy for this, you know? Yeah, I'm so sorry. What was the first question?
About the group dynamic, just what that's like.
So a lot of the teens come in, like I said, they're like, hey, my parents kind of making me come. I don't really want to be here. And I always say, like, listen, we're not going to be talking about substances or addiction the whole time. I'm going to involve pieces of self-esteem and self-confidence and value work and strength spotting, because I think building one's character and self-confidence and esteem to be able to be secure in like oneself is probably the greatest foundation to then understanding like I don't really need these substances. Like I can form a connection, most importantly with myself, but then also with those around me too.
That's such a good way of describing it, because like I'm a person in recovery, so it's always like that was all the things that I was missing when I was in adolescence and even like in a young adult. I was always like searching for that like identity and that stuff that you talked about. So like I just really liked how you articulated that.
Thank you. Yeah. I think that's a piece that is often like so forgotten, and in recovery in general, whether it be Alcoholics Anonymous or NA, the basis of the framework of those programs is community. There's such a gap in knowledge, and this is something I learned as a counselor in this position, is like different levels of care. I have people coming in, and when we do that initial evaluation with them, they always assume, oh, individual therapy is going to work better for me because it's one-on-one and I'm going to get that like really direct care. So it has to be more intense, and being able to describe to them like, I totally understand where you're coming from because that was my own belief. And group work is often so much more intensive as a treatment practice because it provides that different perspectives from other people, that community aspect and the connection building that we often lack. It's so cool. I think one of my favorite parts is because we serve a really broad variety of teens in terms of location. So we could have a teen from one part of Berks County versus like a totally opposite side of it, right? And then when they come to group and they build like friendships and leave, I think that's the coolest thing about it, because a lot of them do stay in connection with each other. And I think that is such a lacking piece of this, is once you're in group, like you're in kind of like a bubble, right? You come in, it's a very structured 3 days a week. You leave, and then if we don't build those or practice those supports, we go right back to those unhealthy habits that we've been practicing for however long too.
What is it like when they are back with their peers, you know, in the mainstream, like when they're back in school? And do you hear that, are they feeling closeted about their recovery, or are they being very transparent about it?
Totally. We talk about that so often in group. And I think it depends on the individual, and again, like how they're able to build their self-esteem and their self-confidence if they're comfortable expressing that to their peers. I know that a lot of them are, and will say like, I'm not using anymore, I'm not using right now. I think that's an important piece too, right? Because as teens, we're constantly growing and changing and evolving. And if like, I tell them, if you can stay abstinent in treatment, just give it a shot. I call it taking a no thank you bite. Like just right now, give it a try. And if it works and you're able to prolong it for a month or a year or however long after treatment, that's awesome. And if you go back to whatever their substance was or trying a different substance, at least they have the supports in place. They know where they can go and where they can come to for help. And we've built those coping skills and those other healthy habits that they can also lean back on. Because I know, like, especially in college students too, like, well, I'm in college, I'm experimenting. That's like a huge like stereotype almost is like, this is the time to do this kind of stuff. So being able to let them grow and try all the things they want to, if they want to, they have supports in place as well, I think is the most important piece of it.
I was curious about the experiential therapy too.
Sure.
Like, I wonder if you can give any examples of some of those exercises that might actually help them in the real world.
Absolutely. So we do, I like a lot of like floor checks or sociometry, we call it. So one big one that I really enjoy is the stages of change. So we print all of the different stages of change and I lay them out on the ground and I'll ask them different prompts and have them like go stand on whatever stage of change they're at, whether it be with their substance or just other healthy habits like working out, eating healthy, things like that. How they feel like they're incorporating their social circle into their recovery, or how stable is their social circle right now? How do you feel in terms of supports that you already have versus where you want to be? And then having those like open conversations. I do one around like the window of tolerance. We call it the river of emotions. So printing out different emotions and laying them out on the ground, just getting people up and moving, because it provides a different like experience than us all sitting in a circle and talking about our feelings. It's hard to identify feelings, first of all. So being able to see them all laid out and then having like open conversations is so helpful, I found.
In addition to, treating young adults and adolescents, you also do adults. Are you seeing a lot of cannabis, like problems associated with cannabis use with the adults as well?
We are. And I find that the biggest like concern coming through the doors right now is DUIs because of cannabis use. The major misconception is, and I learned this again in this field and in this role, is just because I have a medical marijuana card doesn't mean that I can smoke and drive, right? The same way that just because I'm 21 doesn't mean that I can drink and drive. It's still irresponsible and it's still under the influence. So being able to like break that conception and provide more knowledge and education about like, yes, I have a medical marijuana card and how can I use this responsibly as an adult creates such a difference. So we do see a lot of patients, adult patients, coming in with that concern at the moment.
Are they recognizing that it may be more than just occasional use and it could be impacting their life? Because like, I know we hear a lot like, oh, it's just weed, not recognizing it wasn't the weed they may have been smoking in college.
Absolutely.
We know the potency's up. So like, are they recognizing that it is something that's different than what they were using in the past?
I can see that for sure. And again, it depends on the individual. I have some individuals that come in and they do recognize like, this is totally different than what I was smoking or using in college. And right now with like the whole fentanyl epidemic and how that's being like laced and traced in so many different subdivisions around, not just Berks County, but like the greater Philadelphia area even, it's truly heartbreaking that if this is a substance that you're using now, you could die from it in today's day and age, when maybe like 20, 30 years ago, it was just weed, right? It's no longer just weed. So you never really know what you're getting or where you're getting it from, if you're buying it off the street. And even dispensaries, like I want to believe that you can be cautious and careful and that they're more ethically like sourced, perhaps. I don't know what the right wording is for that, but hopefully that you're being more cognizant about where and how your use is affecting not just you, but those around you as well.
I don't know if this would be more in the inpatient setting, but perhaps you experience it as well. Any of your clients who have had any psychotic episodes, or there's that cannabis-induced psychosis, there's the hyperemesis syndrome, some of those other kinds of things that come along with higher potency, more regular use, it seems like.
I personally haven't seen too much of that at the outpatient level. I imagine perhaps in inpatient they've seen it maybe a little bit more. I think in my experience, the only higher level of care that I would recommend to parents is residential inpatient if their teen isn't able to stop, if use continues to increase. if like there's maybe a mental health piece as well, because I try to tackle both of those in our facility, not just the substance use, but the mental health piece as well. And if that is overlooked or if it isn't deemed appropriate for them to stay at outpatient, then the next recommendation would be a residential inpatient facility, which is also really difficult because there aren't very many in our area. So finding one that not only fits their needs, but also I know it's a huge financial piece as well. And I know that's a major deterrent for so many families is the financial piece of it.
Sure. Something that we hear a lot from the clinical world and from parents as well is that their child or the client is not particular to the cannabis using patient client, that they are amotivational, that they really lack the person who has an opioid use disorder, they absolutely get that their quality of life is deteriorated. They want to stop. They want to, do anything they can to get well. But the cravings are really intense with opioids, obviously, and it's really challenging. But with cannabis, what we keep hearing is, amotivational. Like, no, this is great. It's the best thing. Like, it's really helping me. You don't understand. It's not a big deal. All that kind of stuff. Do you encounter that? And what do you do when you encounter it? If and when you encounter that?
I definitely do encounter it. I've had, and I'm always so surprised, like visibly, viscerally so surprised when teens sit in my office and they're like, yeah, actually, it helps my grades. I'm like, wait, what? Like, how does it help your grades? Because obviously that's not maybe the direction that I see a lot of it going in. Or it makes me more relaxed or calmer. So I always say, like, again, bringing it back to that, like, no thank you bite, like just giving it a try. Because if you can take a break from it, and like, I hear you, if you can stop use, like, because I hear that a lot too, like, oh, I can stop whenever I want. Like, I know that this isn't controlling me or my life. I can always stop. Cool. Stop for the 2 months that you're in treatment. Give it a shot. And see how it affects your life. Like, be very intentional and mindful about treatment. Even if you're only there because your parents are here. Like, I try to meet my patients where they're at because I know that they're teens, right? And sometimes building those connections of like, why were you stopping and what the effects are, it's hard to like bridge that gap. So I try and tell them to be as intentional as they can and notice any changes, be intentional and mindful in that thinking practice as well. And then a lot of them do come back like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how lazy I was or how unmotivated I was while I was using versus when I'm actually intentionally stopping use and for a prolonged amount of time too, right?
Right. Yeah, I know. It's so interesting how you often hear people who are further down the road in their recovery say like, oh, I thought that my whole life was, they're so in love with this substance. I mean, it's just the culture around it, the gear around it, all of it.
Goodness,
it just becomes very much a part of an identity almost. And they feel like, and I've heard this expressed, that they feel like if I let that go, I'm going to have no, I'm going to lose my friends. I'm not going to have a life. Like, but then they find out like, oh, wait, are these my friends or are these people who I chose to get high with to make me feel better about that? And, oh yeah, now I'm not living in the game room anymore. Like I'm actually getting out and living life and having sober fun and all that kind of stuff, right?
Absolutely. There was a game that I played with some of my teens when I was interning at Caron. I brought it into like the group space. And it was called Fishbowl. And it's one of my favorite games to play with my friends, just like when we hang out. And I remember one of the teens saying, oh my gosh, I used to play this with my friends when we were drunk or when we were high. And I thought that was the only time I could play this game. Like it was a substance related game in her mind.
Wow.
And like to shatter that was the coolest thing for me because I was like, sober fun is real. Like you can do all of these things when you're sober. There's no like rule that you have to be under some sort of influence to be doing all of these things and to enjoy them, because a lot of the times we find when we're using, we actually lose our sense of identity and as well as our hobbies and our passions. We're not doing the things that bring us happiness anymore. We're finding that we kind of take the easy way out and we do like that whole gamer mentality is like really big because I can just sit in one place, focus on one thing and like pig out on all the snacks around me, right? That's like a whole big thing that I see with my adolescent boys right now. And then they stay up until like the early morning hours and then have a difficult time paying attention in school, and we wonder why. So like the way that it's like truly a cycle that affects so many different aspects of our life too is fascinating.
We work so much with family members. It'd be a part of the conversation. And I encounter so many parents who are looking for the magic words to use with their child to help them see this is not going well. What advice would you give to parents who their child hasn't even come to you yet? You know, I don't need that. I don't need to go to. I don't need a therapist. You know, I'm fine. You're blowing this out of proportion.
Right.
All that kind of stuff. Do you have any words of wisdom you can share with parents, or just even they're looking for that script, like the thing to say, or the question to ask?
Right. I don't think that there is a script. Just like I was just talking to a friend about this. She's expecting and she's reading the What to Expect When You're Expecting, like that really popular book amongst parents. And I was like, do you think this is really going to be like helpful? Like there's no book or script or like magic question that we can ask our children when they're going through this, right? So my biggest piece of advice is just to be as patient as possible and to never lose sight of your support in your children. Because a lot of the times, and I see this so often in parents, is like, okay, I'm going to let you do what you want to do then, because they get to a breaking point too. Like parents are human beings, as hard as it is to reconcile with that fact that our parents have lived lives too, and they've been teens too. They are humans. And so many of them get to that breaking point where it's like, I don't know what else to do. Don't lose like compassion for your child. Don't lose that sense of connection with them. Continue to try and foster that sense of connection, because really, like I said earlier, once we lose that connection with our parents, with our friends, with other supports, teachers, that's often when we again lean back on the connection that we form with our substances, and that our substance fills that void for us. So when we can kind of teach our children that connection exists outside of a substance, and I'm here for you and I love you unconditionally, that unconditional love and support and rapport, I think, goes so much farther than we give it credit for.
I love that, because we don't want to drive them further underground.
Definitely.
So if we're just like wagging our finger at them, like, you got to stop that, you know, I'm going to check your room, I'm going to check your backpack, I'm going to constantly be vigilant about this. Like, that's my job now, is to, you know, police you almost, that we then just make it their job to keep it hidden, instead to like be open, patient, as you said. I love that. And just, you know, really, I think being curious is, I often say, like, because I have a son in recovery today, the cannabis that he was using so long ago is so different than what's out there now. I'm very grateful that he found recovery in 2010, like before this all shifted, and it really is a very different substance. It's still called to him. It still was all of those same kind of alluring pieces of it. But, you know, I was just wringing my hands, worried, not sleeping, Googling things, like trying to figure this out. And really, I wish I had said, you know, you're so passionate about this. Like, why? Because all it really is for you is altering your mood. You know, so can we talk to somebody about what it is that it's doing for you, and could there possibly be an alternative thing that you could be doing? So what are some of the kinds of things that kids can do if it's stress, if it's depression, if it's anxiety, you know, even, you know, obviously there might be medications, but if you can just talk about some of the behavioral things that they can be doing differently.
I think a big piece of it that I want to stress too, for parents specifically, is that like their role in this is to be the parent. And you can't possibly be the parent and the disciplinarian and the therapist. Like, allow these roles to take on their true form. And as a parent, what your job is to, again, provide support and like find ways for them to receive that support. So get them into treatment, get them like whatever support that looks like. In terms of like behavioral alternatives, maybe, I think it's important to try and spark that curiosity within our kids as well, right? So if it comes down to like altering their mood, if that's the reason that they're using substances, again, perhaps not my personal go-to at first, but I think seeking professional medical help and seeing a psychiatrist, and maybe even not medication immediately, but seeing what the psychiatrist has to say if there is some sort of underlying comorbid disorder or issue that we can work on then as well, because that's like a huge issue as well, is that we aren't seeing what all are the issues that someone might be suffering from or experiencing. So being able to target and understand each and every single one of those underlying layers too provides so much background into how we can support and provide that support for our kids. But I think, again, a lot of that, because that connection piece is lost, being able to help provide different ways that they can engage in connection and support is helpful. So whether that be joining extracurriculars at school. I know sports is like a big one for my guys and boys specifically, or even the girls that come into groups, finding ways that they can engage in alternative hobbies, I think is a big one. I like to try and incorporate as many different types of therapeutic modalities as I can, one of them being like art therapy. So trying to engage like a passion in our kids that they may not have explored before, and having those conversations with parents too, like how can we re-engage and repurpose a lot of these hobbies into now ways that they find more helpful and more meaningful in their earlier or older adolescent ages.
Are most kids who are using cannabis, do you have any idea of how they're getting it? Is it a medical marijuana card, or is it somebody else's medical marijuana card, or is it illicit? Do you have any sense of that?
I would think, in just my experience, a lot of the times it is illicit, which makes me really fearful for the kids, especially because once they're in group, like I start to develop a connection and relationship with them as well. And holding that barrier too can be very difficult because they're kids, you know? A lot of them are just looking for some sort of support and guidance. So I find that a lot of the times it is illicit. I don't have too much knowledge of this, so forgive me for my own ignorance, but I know a lot of kids are talking about now like a caregiver card where their parent or guardian can obtain a medical marijuana card that is under the name of like a caregiver, and they can then buy the substance for their kids. I don't know too much about that, but I have heard it amongst a few of my teens that could be a way that they're getting them. But if I'm not mistaken, you do have to be 18 to have your own card, which then leaves these teens trying to find different alternative ways of getting it which often is just illicit routes.
Right. You mentioned a few things. You mentioned experiential therapy. Are there any treatment modalities or anything that you're seeing being researched right now that you're excited about?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think there's like my favorite part about this field is that it's constantly growing, constantly evolving. As more widely accepted as therapy is becoming, it's still relatively new, right? So we're still finding different ways to treat different disorders and different issues and concerns, which I think is my favorite piece about it all, because it is so new and exciting to be able to do all of this research. I think CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is a really great modality in treating substance use disorders because it connects the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, right? I was very lucky that was the modality that I was trained in my graduate program. So finding the why and the purpose behind someone's action, what purpose is that serving us, is a lot of the times the answer to, or the reason to why we're using as well. And then kind of fleshing that out more and trying to figure out and pinpoint a specific reason can be really helpful. So I know CBT is an older model, but there's so much research being done now in different ways, and being more trauma informed and being more mindful and innovative with our practices, and sensitive as well, I think is so important and just exciting work.
How would you, Shannon, define recovery?
Ooh, loaded question. Recovery is an ongoing process. I like to think of it as a cycle, right? Just like the stages of change. It's not linear. So recovery is, I think of it in that like cycle mentality where we're constantly moving through it. We could take a couple steps back. We can take steps forward. You throw relapse into it too. And where do you find yourself once you relapse? If you relapse, continuing to stay connected and supported, I think is a huge piece of it. So definitely just a journey that we're constantly working on. There's no end point. So maintaining those supports and connections is one of the most vital pieces that I stress to my teens and adults. I think it's important for them to remember that as well, because life will continue lifing and we have no control over that. So what do we have control over? Figuring that out and working towards that, I think, is the most important piece in recovery.
That's great.
Thank you so much.
You're such
Thank
a
you guys.
positive, effervescent person. I have
is
to
so
believe that you
sweet.
have very lucky clients.
Thank you so much. That's so lovely to hear.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And thank you for having me. It's so important to have these conversations and to continue educating not just our patients, but their parents and just all people connected in the field. I think it's important. So you guys are doing such important work. And I really appreciate the work that you guys do. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Shannon.
Thank you.